All right, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm really pumped for this PCBH corner, and my gratitude for Deepu George for giving us this time and being able to talk about everything related to PCBH. And Deepu, my mind says that probably most people that are going to watch this know who you are, but do you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself as far as your role, where you're at, and anything that you think would be good as far as including in that introduction?
Absolutely, man. First of all, because this is like one of the series that I rely on for my education and my own knowledge. So it's kind of mind-blowing to be here. My name is Deepu George, and I'm a associate professor in family medicine at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley School of Medicine. I'm in South Texas. Most people think South Texas is San Antonio. We're still like 4 hours from San Antonio, all the way down next to the US-Mexico border. I've been very fortunate to come here at the start of the medical school in 2014. There was really the building in the room that I sit in was just marshlands, and then they converted into our primary care clinic. We were lucky to get some initial seed money to jumpstart PCBH work in 2014. So through that, we've just become a team that really is focused on integration, education, and clinical work. So I serve as a faculty member. I also serve as lead for primary care behavioral health integration at the medical school here. My background is I finished my master's in clinical psychology in India. And then from there, I came over to the US to finish my training in family therapy. And I always knew I wanted to work in a medical setting because all the textbooks and cases and stuff that I read as a family therapy student in India involved medical settings. And I was so disappointed when I came to the US that family therapy was like, at least the program that I was exposed to, didn't really have anything really related to medicine. And I, halfway through my training is when I found out there was even a thing called integrated behavioral health and medical family therapy. And so I got very lucky during my pre-doc internship to be in integrated care environment. And so that's how my journey started and what got me here.
First of all, Deepu, you're not going to talk about the sports psych stuff and working with the basketball team that I'm super jealous of, that I hear all the time about what you're doing. You're not going to mention anything about that?
That's right. Okay. Yes, quick detour there. Thanks for cueing me. I totally forget because, it's so many things on my plate. So one of the cool things that we started doing, we have a sports medicine fellowship that kind of grew with the family medicine residency. And, there was needs. The athletes would come with different injuries and they would come to the clinic. And one of the things that we realized is access to athletes are limited just because of their schedule and just because of they go for away games, and they're very comfortable in their training room. Like they rather not go outside of their training room, right? And so we started seeing few patients initially, and then in December we started kind of experimenting with what if I just showed up to the training room and kind of am there, and so athletic trainers kind of become like our mid-level providers who are like scanning for things, looking for people in injury, people maybe showing some signs and symptoms of distress, or even just having a harder time recovering from their injury. And so what I do is I go there 1/2 day a week, and there are days I've seen like just one handoff because I'm just there. But now I typically see 4 handoffs, and 4, or some of them are scheduled, some of them are like handoffs. So the athletic trainers to me function as like my primary care colleagues because they're with them, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is you need to kind of meet with one of our colleagues who's going to come later today, and so they just schedule out. We've had athletes reach out independently because they announced the services recently, and so I usually ask because I have no context when they walk in sometimes because there's no warm handoff that can happen because of the setting. They say, oh yeah, they talked about what you do, and I thought I needed to come and check in. I had athletes who came, and this one girl like just moved here internationally, and she said, I get really pissed off on the court, and that really ruins the moment and what happens in the team. So I really want to work on my anger. It's been amazing. So yeah, and on my badge I have LH, that stands for Lou Hill. Lou Hill was our basketball coach. Yeah, really integrated it to the stream of things. Our basketball coach, God bless his soul, he passed away last year. And it was a big moment for the team because he was kind of like a larger than life father figure for a lot. And so they requested if I would travel with the team for a couple of games. So I was on the road for their Western Athletic Conference and a couple of other games when they traveled. And believe it or not, I did consults like at 11 at night after games. And people would want to say, the coaches would identify somebody, or they say, talk to him, he's here, he's available. So it's been an incredible journey so far with the basketball team and all athletics.
Deepu, real quick, do you have a mic that is on your shirt, or is a mic connected to the computer?
It's connected to the computer.
Okay. It sometimes, it hasn't happened a lot, but it sometimes will go real loud with it. And I thought I was trying to pick up if it was like when you were moving or not, but it's weird. I don't think there is a pattern to it. So
okay.
No worries about it.
How does it sound now? I switched it to my other camera.
That's perfect. And again, that's the thing, like for the 95% of it, it was great. You know what's interesting, as you say about the sports psych thing, and I think this is where, or working with the teams, this idea, and you use the word access, and like going where people are, I think obviously that's the main thing about primary care. Like, let's just go to where people go. I think it's the same thing with like school-based health systems, like go where people go. And what an incredible idea of being in the training room where athletes are going to come, and probably, my mind predicts athletes are going to come, even maybe getting treatment, even getting, maybe working through injuries or just whatever it is. I know how it was for me as an athlete, like what the training room environment was. And then to be on the road, like talk about being in the moment where it's needed. That's incredible, Deepu. That's awesome.
Oh my gosh, man. Yeah, definitely. And the training room is also where the physicians see them, right? So I usually, when in my intro, I'd say, my name is Deepu George and I work as a behavioral health consultant and I'm part of your sports medicine team. Right. And so
cool is that?
Yeah, and then and then I say I get involved in situations where your health involves more than just physical factors. So we look at your habits, thoughts, emotions, stressors, and how that may be impacting your performance or your health, right? So, and then that's kind of the intro. And then I'm part of the entourage for the athletes, essentially.
Again, that gets me so hyped in so many different ways. That is just so freaking cool. And I don't know, I'm super jealous, super jelly about that, that you get to do that. But again, I think if anybody's watching this, I think it does, I know a lot of times there's even conversations about on the listserv on CFHA, it's like, taking PCBH into other specialty settings. And I always remember talking to, Jeff Ryder about this. And, one of the things that, he says is like, PCBH was made for primary care. That's the function of it, was be within primary care. I do think that the generalizable aspects of it is what you're talking about, like access, being on spot, being on demand, like that is just so freaking cool.
Yeah, so when I wanted to make sure I'm not replicating mental health services when I went to the setting, right? So I was keeping as much as of the gather framework in my mind. I wanted to kind of be very clear that what I provide is the primary level of integration that's needed, which we probably can address 80 to 90% of the concerns here. And then I'll rely on my sports medicine colleagues for if they need medication management or anything like that, or if I suspect that they need further evaluation, I'll work with them. And then we'll, again, do the stepped up care when needed, right? Like we'll send them to counseling or the mental health services on campus when needed. But my goal in the team is just to mirror what I would do in the clinic.
And that is just so awesome. And I think about it, and it's one of the things that I know we both share. Oh, and my mind also want to go back for people that are watching this. When Deepu was given his introduction, you could tell one of the things that I loved, like you knew the introduction. It was you were saying the same thing every single time, like it's a standard introduction. You're saying off the top of the head. And I think this is one of the subtleties that oftentimes we don't talk a lot about within PCBH work, and making sure that you have sound introductions, things like that. So that was just my gratitude just on the spot there. My mind also goes to, and obviously where you're located with your clinical work in Rio Grande, and then us in Yakima, of really trying to provide services to populations, one, that have been completely left out of the healthcare conversation, not just mental health, but just
Right.
completely left out of healthcare in general. And then on top of it, very much the stigma of mental health is profound as far as what that means and breaking that down. And I think about athletes, I think about athletes of just
Yeah.
where mental health, I'm sure, is a very scary, very taboo thing to bring up, even within a team concept that can be almost seen as a weakness. The fact that you're there and it's normalizing it, similar to what we try to do with our patient population, that's incredible.
Yeah, and I know just me traveling with the team and just being present, like I would go to the practices with them. I didn't have to, but my logic was I want to be around. I want to kind of build familiarity. I know that made a difference in some folks ultimately coming in to just check in. And I had this guy who wanted to kind of meet, but he wasn't sure. But like, new season started, he showed up twice. I saw him twice, and we worked on basically a value sheet on how he can move towards the kind of athlete that he wants to be, the teammate that he wants to be, and what are the uncomfortable things that he has to hold in order to move closer to his valued living, right? Or like what really matters to him.
My mind is being blown. My mind is being blown. And one of the things that I always like to highlight, and I tell Deepu about this all the time, or I tell you about this all the time, is that you're just one of my favorite people when we go to conferences and stuff, just to talk with and touch base with. And I think this is the type of stuff, just the innovation that's there. Dude, my gratitude. That is just so freaking cool, and it gets me pumped and hyped. And like you said, I mean, my mind's being really stuck on the idea of just not replicating mental health. Like let's
Yeah.
do something different. And that's what PCBH, and I think that's what a lot of these things are just trying to do, is just let's not replicate what we know has created a lot of barriers. Let's do things different. That idea of meeting with someone at 11 p.m. after a game, like how freaking cool is that? That is
I thought it was the coolest thing.
oh dude,
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
cool.
no,
That's
for
cool.
sure. And then I think the other frame that I had to do, like we're still shaping the service a little bit, right? Like their academic coordinators or athletic trainers will say, "Oh yeah, you need to go see Dr. George at whatever time." And sometimes the athletes have an idea, right? And then sometimes they're like, "Oh, I was just told to come here." So in thinking about the bigger entourage of the sports medicine atmosphere, which is the athletic trainers, academic coordinators who work with the day-to-day struggles of the athlete, I kind of told them last time, I said, maybe we need to get together and let me talk to you a little bit about how to do a warm handoff, right? Like what would really help you kind of connect the dots for the athlete and how I come into the picture, right? Because I think athletes want to get help, but I think if we have a clearer picture of what the rationale is, I think it'll be easier for the athlete and myself in the room once they're there. So
Hell
that's
yeah.
one of the things that I'm like beginning to think about. How do I get all the athletic trainers to kind of really articulate why they think this would be a good idea, right? So how to like shape that warm handoff process, even though they may not be physically there, at least that the initial part works out well.
Before the video, we were talking about trying to keep this under 30 minutes. There's no freaking way we're going to keep this under 30 minutes. This is great. Now, the one thing I did want to also back up to something that you said, that it definitely just seems to range through every single time we talk with like leaders in the field about the beginnings of PCBH and how they got involved, is that people use words like I got lucky, I was fortunate, it was an accident, that
Yeah.
things have. And it seemed like you were saying that one of the accidents was during your internship year. When was that or maybe a couple different accidents that helped you get to this form of PCBH and where you're at now?
Yeah, two major or maybe three major accidents that kind of led me to this path. So one was I was in we had to do pre-doctoral internships of family therapy, and I was in a non-medical family therapy program, so I was kind of swimming against the current and looking for a spot. So I interviewed at Southern Regional AHEC and Duke Family Medicine in North Carolina, and East Carolina University has a medical family therapy program. I was like, oh my God, I'm going against the big wigs here, right? Like, because I was like, coming from Georgia. And I interviewed and I waited, and then I got admitted to the program. And that was like one of the greatest moments of my life. And I went in, and Dan Marlowe was the guy who hired me, and I was just profusely thankful to Dan. I was like, you have no idea what you've done for me. And he said, and I said, I didn't have all the technical stuff. And one of the things that he told me gave me a lot of confidence and comfort to go into the primary care thing, because it was very scary to be amongst doctors and nurses and MAs and all of that. So he said, the reason we picked you is because you seem to know something about community and building community. And for integrated care, that's probably the most important thing. And not the technical stuff you're going to learn, right? That's what you're here for. So that kind of and you value relationships. So that kind of put me at so much ease. And then on the second day of my internship, I came across behavioral consultation and primary care book. I read the primer on primary care and like the other chapter on just PCBH and primary care. I was just like, it blew my socks off, because I was like, all this time I'm thinking I need to be in a psychiatry kind of a setting. No, like this is where I need to be. So that was like the second accident that happened. And along that way, I guess I got introduced to ACT, and Matt Martin was my immediate supervisor, right? So I trained with Matt, and so Matt introduced me to ACT, so was on that tangent for a while. Then the biggest accident, I think, would be I moved to South Texas. There's like this big opportunity for integrated behavioral health grant application. Went through all kinds of crazy steps just to apply. As I was applying, there was a pressure to almost consider the collaborative care model, and my heart just didn't sit with it. And I couldn't really commit to it. Not because I have anything against model. I just know, like, being in South Texas, a more horizontal approach would make much more sense so that we can have better access. And I cold called Patty Robinson. It was a Wednesday night, and it was raining outside, like cueing the dramatic music and anticipation.
This is like from a movie, right? This is
And I had called and left a message, and she called me back, and I'm like answering the call, and I kind of said, as a Patty, like, I want to put you and Kirk as technical assistants for this work, and we're in South Texas. Like, your book has been influential in my life. And she said, yeah, sign us up. Oh man, like, and then so we basically got Kirk to come down and do our initial training. So talk about being lucky. I was here, we got the grant. We got Patty and Kirk's yes, and they came down here and kind of did the typical onboarding process. We hired our initial staff and kind of went from there. Yeah, so that was my start to PCBH.
In my mind is just, so I just texted my supervisee. I was like, hey, I'm going to be running late to supervision because we're not stopping this. So the thing that, my mind just is so struck by, and then again, it's amazing about how much it's the same story every single time. Obviously, different components, different things that are through. But these moments, and I know we both really appreciated Robert Rosenbaum's single session therapy presentation a year ago at CFHA, and we had him come back with our consortium twice this past year, and he just continues to talk about these profound moments that you never know how they're going to ripple out. And it's almost like just being able to be with those moments, be aware and to engage. And then I also think about, I try to tell everybody this. I think it's tough for people to actually probably believe it, but I'm glad this story is another one to reinforce. It's like, reach out to people, like you said, you called Patty Robinson, like reach out to people. It's incredible.
Yeah. So I think that really, and then of course CFHA plays a big role in that, right? Then of course through Patty we get connected to all kinds of folks. The other person that I kind of cold called was Kent Corso, and so he's been heavily influential in our development here, because we said he can do some crazy analytical stuff, which we thought we could pull off here. So we just kind of cold called him from the listserv. And Chris Hunter has been gracious, generous. I mean, again, like tear up thinking about some of these moments, because like it's like we're rolling with people that have made my life possible professionally, you know. So
Dude, that is so cool. That is so cool. And you bring up, I think, the one thing, you know, there's so many just wonderful people, I think, within the PCBH kind of community and the leaders of the field. And I think we all have different relational frames built up with each individual. You know, and the one that I have for you is just this. And again, I just even feel it like every single time I talk to you, even through a virtual and a Zoom screen, is this connection, this humanity, this spirituality that comes up. And as you even said, like tears come up when we talk about that.
mhm.
You know, and I don't know what the question is. Maybe it's just more of a prompt.
Sure.
Is there anything that is it life experiences? Is it readings? Is it just clinical? Like what has caused, I think what a lot of people feel every single time they talk with you is about this, you know, innate spirituality, this innate connection, this want to be a human. You know, how did that come about? How did that progress?
Yeah, that's I mean, deep and long question, right? So I'll try to kind of capture the things that are running through my mind as you kind of gave me those things to think about. In our most recent podcast, we talked about lifelong learning, right? So I always think about, we can get really technically high tech, right? Like even when with techniques and theory and all of that stuff. So I kind of see my task as a developing professional and as a person in two lanes, right? I want to do enough to build up my technical skills and awareness and knowledge of like treatment guidelines and where to look up for stuff. And I also simultaneously need to invest in retaining the humanity, right? Like investing in humanity, like being human, I think is, I think Cornel West, is a public theologian and writer, that and he talks about being human is like learning how to die. And I think a part of that is also being human is learning how to be more and more open in your whatever your visual field is. I think just through our conditioning and other things that we go through, if we don't pay attention, it just stays at a certain spot, right? Like we're not evolving. And so I talk about the technical and the humanity piece in our learning. The other influences and other things that I think about is I grew up in India, and India is such a wide variety of pluralistic community, as you can call it. So we're home to multiple religions, right? To kind of start off there. I grew up as a Christian, and my dad's a priest, and so this whole preacher thing kind of runs in my community. It always baffled me why even members of my community would look at Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, and kind of push them off and kind of say they're less than. So I think a lot of it starts from just that basic disagreement with that notion that just because they have a different set of beliefs, they are somehow less worthy of God's grace and all of those things. I think a lot of it really starts there. And my dad and my parents were definitely influential in helping me frame it differently too, right? Like my dad would tell these doubters, he said, if they come to our church on a Sunday, they'll see me giving bread and wine, and I'm saying it's the body of Christ, and that's pretty weird, right? Like, so why, that's equally weird. It's just not weird to us because we do it every week. And so whatever is it. So I think a lot of the curiosity begins from there. And it's just been a journey of wanting to find how to expand this idea of what spirituality is, that it's not bound to practices and rituals. It's not bound to ideas and certain dogmas. It's not bound to rightness and wrongness. It's just really in, functional contextualism, where you said that the big capital T truth is whatever works for you. What's going to open you up to the bigger grace that there is, right? And it's actually one of the psychology professors last week when we were talking, and he's like, oh, I'm not spiritual or whatever. And so, and I said, yeah, so that makes sense, right? Like, I think we've done such a poor job of articulating what spirituality is, because religion is just a caricature for most people, right? It's not the vast expanse of the universe as such. So to me, spirituality is when somebody is able to go beyond their comfort and self-preferential options that they really want to keep to themselves and act beyond that. That's mind-blowing, because as human beings, from an evolutionary perspective, we're probably creatures of comfort, right? So any act beyond your skin and your ideas, and that can kind of go beyond, to me, that is spirituality. That is deeply spiritual. So it's a mom giving up something to be there for her child, right? To me, that's precious. And it's like all these stories of, about civil rights in the US, right? Like, we are here where we are, we're still a long way to go, but it's because people have been willing to crawl out of their skin to be at a place where they shouldn't be, in order to draw the circle of compassion much and much and much wider than ever it has been, right? And that may mean standing in that place, getting beat, getting spit at, all of those things. To me, all of that is impossible from just like a logical point of view, because logic would have it, you shouldn't be there.
Exactly.
Right. So something in their courage, their value system, something in their spirit is saying, no, you need to be in this crazy intersection, for not yourself really, but for somebody else. So that definitely drives a lot of the things I think about.
Deepu, my mind's going so many different ways with so many different questions. And I think the two ones that I want to make sure to ask is one of, how you infuse this within your BHC visits, because I think it's an interesting thing. I think medicine is changing. And I think alongside of that, PCBH then is changing this too. But I mean, we're still very, very steeped in this, decontextualizing what people come in with. We're still very much a reductionistic kind of approach to treatment. And, while, I think, us behavioral health, we love like pointing our finger at medicine and be like, hey, you should know better. Like, we do that probably just the same amount in a lot of ways when we're working with patients, about how much we decontextualize what people are coming into and just apply an algorithm kind of indiscriminately. So the one thing my mind gets curious about is like, how do you infuse this sense within visits? And then the second thing that I want to ask is, what do you do through your daily practice? And it's something that I still remember our conversation. We were at, I think, Rochester or Houston. I think it might've been Houston. You told me about one of the silent retreats that you went to, and that's a big thing. But is there anything that you do on a daily basis? So those two questions, where does your mind go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I need to do definitely a better job at making sure it's infused every single time. But one of the standard questions that you may hear me ask if you're observing me is, does faith or any sense of spirituality or anything that gives you purpose and meaning, is there something that kind of occupies your time during the week with that components? Or sometimes the other question may be, does faith or spirituality have a connection to your health and what you're going through in terms of your experience now? And so a lot of the times they may say, if they say no, I usually push back and say, is there anything that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose, or that allows you to just be grounded, right? So some people really say, no, I really don't mess with that. And so we probably won't explore that any further. But for a lot of the folks who do have some connection or some inclination, people have even said, I've been interested in knowing more about Buddhism, or knowing more about something spiritual, or I've walked away from God for a long time, right? Most of the times, it's such a meaningful part of their life that no one probably have asked about. It makes even great sense to have that as part of the behavioral change plan that we send them home with, right? The other thing that I do a lot of the times I find myself doing is just like reframing things for people, right? So one classic example I think about is grief. So my basic questions around grief often say, have you had any religious or community rituals, as you said, by your loved one? Did you have that? And if they say yes, so did you attend? How was that for you? The other thing I often reframe grief as is, especially if they are grieving really hard, right? So I usually say, I just want you to know that the depth of your grief is directly proportionate to the depth of your love for this person. Can you ever imagine a time in your life where you're going to stop loving this person? And then the answer is no, right? So great. So right now what's happening is it sounds like these memories and other things come at unopportune, intermittent times. And I'm wondering, if you were to function from the perspective of love, can we make time for these memories and connect actions to it? So you're serving and connected to this other side of grief. And I usually use my hand, say, if this side is love, this side is grief, right? So to me, that just helping them free up, to me, it's a spiritual moment. It's a spiritual connection that they haven't really thought about. I had a patient last week who feels guilty that she didn't do enough for her parents. So I said, well, that's awesome, because on this side is guilt, but if this side wasn't filled with love, you wouldn't feel a thing.
You wouldn't
right?
care.
You wouldn't care.
So
So
you know what's so beautiful about that, I think, Deepu, and I love so much what you're saying, and my mind just goes like, how much now that changes the relational frame that we have with those experiences, right? Like now there's almost a sense of gratitude for grieving. Like there's a sense of gratitude for the uncomfortableness, because as you said, it is going to be forever connected to love and that individual. Like that's a beautiful moment that again changes what our relationship that we even have with that experience, that no longer does that have to be a thing to, you know, shy away from or that we have to get rid. It's like that's part of that love. That's beautiful, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, like, when we talk about behavior activation exercises, so like I had this one patient who, having connected with their spirituality, having like sat down to kind of do her prayers, or sometimes when I suggest relaxation activities, I pair it with, oh, I sit and pray 3 times a day. I said, would it make sense for you to be fully present and less distracted, so you're fully available for that spiritual moment? And usually they say yes, and then say, okay, so what we're going to teach you today is a way to use your breath to really center yourself, so that as you're praying and doing your little activity, you're fully there, right? So then we just tag it with their usual routines, but now they're getting a dose of relaxation and oxygen and things that they need, right? Like just to kind of help them feel grounded. So with this other patient, we talked about getting her to walk, and I said, one of the things I heard you say is that you haven't had any time to pray. And I was wondering if we can use this 30 minutes of walk that you're thinking of as your silent time with God and the saints, because she had pictures of saints in the background. It was a virtual visit. And then I said that, she paused, tears, and yeah, that was our plan, right? So it was just kind of helping patients make the connection. The other theme that usually comes is, I'm angry at God, right? Like and so I would say it would make great sense that you would be angry at God. I said, did you know that, you know, you may get randomly angry at a stranger who cuts you off, but anger is such an invested emotion. Like if you have to be angry at someone, you have to be really close to them, right? So what you're telling me is you're so close to God that you had the freedom to be really pissed off at it or at her, whatever it may be, right? And I said, I think just by doing that, you're telling, to me, it seems like you're probably more connected to God than you think you are, right? Again, kind of like helping them reframe anger as separation, and to kind of helping them think anger as connection. Like, and again, so you asked about influences. Mother Teresa is one of those influences for me, right? Towards the end of her life, when they revealed her spiritual diaries and stuff, she questioned the existence of God and all of the things that the Christian beliefs typically hold, right? And so that was like a big discussion. Oh, she shouldn't be a saint. And like when they were kind of making her into a like going through the sainthood process, she's now Saint Teresa of Calcutta. So it's some of the theologians, and to me, how it appeared was, okay, she was waking up to abject poverty and people dying every single day. That's what she did. And I can see why she may be so pissed off, because she is seeing that every single day, and that she is so close with God that in her private moments, she has the freedom to say, where the hell were you yesterday? why didn't you show up? I was out there by myself, kind of thing, right? So that's where that's where I take that framework from, and that's allowed me to kind of use that in visits with patients.
In Deepu, my mind's just going right now. Again, this is why I love these conversations. This is more for me than anything else. About even what we're going through right now with COVID, and obviously you work with residents and medical students, and the one thing that, again, we continuously just hear is about, it's like, hey, we're not supposed to see this much death. Like, this is like overwhelming. Like, and again, it makes me emotional just even thinking about it, because like our residents and our medical attendants have been just so selfless, as far as like being willing to just like, I'm gonna go in here head first. It might mean that I'm away from my family and I'm working long hours and I'm seeing all this different stuff, and that anger that comes up, that frustration, all those uncomfortableness. And as you're saying though, like, to be able to redefine that relationship that we have with that, to be able to redefine it, whether this be something about being angry with a higher power or something, or just being angry with humanity, it still reflects, as you said, this connection that we have with it. That's profound.
Yeah, so that's been another way spirituality shows up in
Mm.
conversations, right? And we're in South Texas, where there tends to be a lot of connection to Catholicism and other forms of Christianity or other forms of spirituality, and also kind of sometimes reframing, your the concept of God and spiritual beings is much bigger than what we think that is, right? So it's not an exacting God; it's an expanse of the universe, and so it's infinite, and kind of helping people connect to that idea that kind of frees them up, to be okay with their anger, to be okay angry in the relationship with God, and the knowledge that it'll work out. In terms of practices, um, at least on a 7-day week, at least 4 to 5 times in the morning, there's this little thing called pray as you go. It's like this little meditative thing where they really ask you to reflect and put yourself in the shoes of whatever is being read. I'm a Jesuit product. I was trained by the Jesuits, and so it's like a Jesuit thing that they do. But I have a resident who asked me about it, and I told him this is what I do. He does it more frequently than I do, and then he comes and tells me. So I was like, all right, man, you're beating me at my own game here. So that's one thing I do. I try to do. I try to at least give, again, 4 to 5 days of the week, like 10 to 15 minutes of just silence and meditation. So I do guided meditations during that time. So that's like 2 things I do for sure for spiritual. The other part of my life, I'm actually in the process of potentially seeking ordination as a priest in the Episcopal Church. And so there's a lot of investment in that, right? So I had to write a spiritual autobiography. I had to do something called a rule of life, which, by the way, I used to act Matrix as my rule of life, but the central rule being, am I awakened and aware of the presence of a mercy and grace around me throughout the day, right? That's the basic awareness.
Can you say that again? Am I awakened and aware?
And aware of grace and mercy and God's presence throughout the day. So am I seeing it in the people that I interact with? Am I hearing it? Like, because this idea that you're never far from all of these things, it's there, it's always near you, but how open are you to it? So in a moment of anger, am I willing to kind of just take a deep breath and kind of be aware of the bigger picture, so I don't have to let that emotion call the shots? Something more graceful can call the shots. So I use the matrix and use the 4 quadrants to kind of write that whole thing up. So I had to do a lot of self-reflective work over the last year, and that's definitely been a very humbling process. And in fact, towards the end of one of the reflections, I used the open, aware, engaged framework to kind of talk about, because one of my things was I want to do this not because I want to be in a church. I want to do this because I can be a spiritual portal in places that it normally wouldn't happen, right? So in a residency setting, in a medical school setting, end of life, at the near death experience of somebody, right? So I can be quote unquote like a sacramental presence for people who don't even think about it, right? not with any agenda at all, even, and being able to do that. So with that, I do a lot of reading and deep dives, like on my own. I sometimes, at least once or twice a month, I do reflections of like things at one of our local churches. And so that naturally takes me to reading and listening to all kinds of people. So Richard Rohr is a Franciscan priest who was been like invited by the National Science Foundation and Google and all that. He's basically merged the expansive science of the universe and spirituality so brilliantly. So he's somebody that I listen to. On my wall here, you'll see somebody named Father Greg Boyle. He has something called the Homeboy Industries in LA. And so he speaks a lot about widening the circle of compassion. And so that's something that's definitely a big part of the way I think about the world. And so those are all my grounding people that I kind of listen to and pay attention to. More recently, I've been listening to Cornel West. And there's another guy who passed away. His name is Bishop Shelby Spong. A lot of people may consider him Antichrist, but his views are controversial. Just to give you a dose of what that is, in 1976, he was arguing for ordination of women and accepting LGBTQ community as members of the church and fully ordained people of the church. And in fact, he ordained one of the first LGBTQ openly gay priests in the community. And so that's his. And to the other thing that I think about is like beyond the caricature of like Christian theology, the good news really is only good news if you're willing to let go of the idea that the world is an orderly place. Like, you know, the basic tenets of the message is the first shall be last, the last shall be first, right? Like that's topsy-turvy, upside down way of thinking about grace and mercy. So I get all of that from all these folks that I listen to.
Deepu, I cannot, man, and this is where, you know, my mind is thinking, you know, we had some items that we wanted to go through, and this is what I wanted. This is exactly what I wanted, was this free-flowing genuineness and my gratitude so much for it. And I think where, you know, because I definitely wanted to get to those topics about, you know, bridging the gap, you know, as much as possible, where, you know, with PCBH and MFT and just the continued kind of support of one another's goals, and then also advice that you have for, you know, students and new BHCs within the program. My mind says we'll just do another video. We'll find another time to do a video to do it. Deepu, I cannot express my gratitude enough for this moment, and I know, you know, there's always this kind of really weird experience that, you know, Bridget and I get when people are like, you know, oh, we watched your corners and we watched your videos and stuff. Like it's super weird in a lot of different ways. I'm just very grateful for this one. I don't even care if anybody watches this right now. I've just been very appreciative of hearing, and my gratitude, man. And I can't wait for us to be able to be in person and chat about this more. And I'll give a plug that if anybody's ever at a conference and they see Deepu, and Deepu, I apologize for putting this out there without your consent, talk to him, find him, and ask him and pick his mind, because it's really brilliant.
I'm happy to do that anytime. Because so many people have given so much to me that I cannot not do that. So I'm available however I can help.
Deepu, I appreciate it. Any final thoughts, any final places your mind's going before we sign off?
No, I think it rests in this, because I didn't know what we were going to talk about. And then it just like, it just profound gratitude for just the opportunity to zone in on something like this in the middle of my day today. So it's been very rewarding.
You know what's interesting? I'll end with this. This morning I woke up, I was like, oh, this is great. I can't wait to talk to Deepu, catch up. And like 15 minutes before we started, I was like, I should probably come up with like a list of things to talk about. Then my mind was like, no, you don't need to, because that would try to pigeonhole, like just let Deepu do his thing. Like, let's just go. I was like, all right, well, I'll come up with a couple topics. So I'm glad that we were, again, to have this genuineness come through. And I know it's going to be really appreciated by a lot of people. So again, man, my gratitude. Thank you.